All right, we will get started. It is 5 o'clock on December 5th. We are here in council chambers. This is our town council finance workshop. This is an opportunity for the councilors who are in attendance to learn more from Min and Jessica about our assessing and budget processes. Some of this is coming from community conversations and also just what I believe is our duty to understand and do as elected officials. So thank you. Min, I think you're up first, so you'll give us a rundown of Municipal Assessing 101. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. So we start right off. What are property taxes? Property taxes are funds raised for the municipal services, basically to pay the bills. We are allowed to raise these funds through the state by Title 36 of the main revised statutes, and also by the main Constitution, Article 9, Section 8, which reads, all taxes upon real and personal estates assessed by the authority of the state shall be apportioned and assessed equally according to the just values thereof. And there are three types of property taxes: real property tax, which are the real estate, personal property, and special assessments. Oh, and if there's any questions, feel free to just jump in. Next, the parties that are involved in property tax. Very beginning are the assessors, which are myself, and which is appointed by the town manager and confirmed by council. The appointment is for 5 years, maximum of 5 years, and will be needed to be renewed every 5 years after. On that note, even though the assessor are employed by the municipalities, we are actually state agents, and so we fall under the authority of the state tax assessors. The other municipal officials that are involved in the taxation.
So I was just going to say that unlike most of the other town officials that you appoint, the assessor actually has to have passed certain qualification and exams in order to be able to hold the seat. Most of our other jobs, we can hire people and train them to do the job. The assessor, we can't.
We're also authorized, and you're also authorized to issue certain abatements.
So, Min, nobody's asked, but I'm sure somebody wonders what an overlay is.
An overlay is basically the amount that I set in predicting issues with the valuations, and also to correct the fractional percentages on the valuations. If an overlay value is not used, it will go to the general funds. Next is the tax collector. The tax collector basically what the title is collect taxes once he or she received the warrant from the assessor. And the last entity that's involved in the tax process are the local boards of assessment review, and they hear appeal requests. Before we get into actually the process of commitment, there's a concept that we really need to understand, and that's the difference between mass appraisal, which is what I do, versus individual appraisal, which is what a appraisal does. And the definition of a mass appraisal is the systematic appraisal of groups of properties as of a given date using standardized procedures and statistical testings. The difference between them are in the scope. Mass appraisal deal with large amount of parcels, whereas single property appraiser work with single individual properties at a time. And the purpose for mass appraisal typically is for property tax assessment, whereas single property appraisal is for real estate transaction, mortgage lending, and legal disputes. The methodology difference between the two is the mass appraisal use standardized procedures and statistical models, whereas the single property appraiser use detailed analysis and on-site inspection of the property. With the mass appraisal, there's the efficiency is high. We can assess multiple properties, hundreds to thousands properties simultaneously, whereas single property appraisal deals with one property at a time, typically one property at a time. For consistency, mass appraisal ensure uniformity across similar properties, whereas single property appraisal tailor the unique characteristic of the individual property. And for data use, we use a very broad data set from many properties compared to single property. They use specific data from the individual property for obtaining their assessment. Accuracy, mass appraisal, we're accurate if we're looking at large groups of properties, whereas single property appraisal, they're highly accurate, but only for individual specific properties. And the process for assessing and committing property taxes. Very first thing, as of April 1st, I have to get an inventory list of all real and personal property in the town. And as you see, on most of these, you see reference to statutes or court cases. It's because almost everything that assessors do are based off of statutes. For the inventory, we have to have accurate list of owners and the property and the condition of the property as of April 1st. Basically meaning if you sold your house and the final transaction was done on April 2nd, you're not the owner. It's whoever owned that property as of April 1st. And if you start construction April 2nd, there was no construction done on that property as of April 1st. It is assessed based on what was there as of April 1st. Once we have the inventory list, we then start to determine the value of the properties. And in the determination of the values, the assessor must apportion and assess the property equally according to its just value. And just value are generally defined as the fair market value. And in the process of determining the value, all three approaches to valuation must be considered. We do not have to use all three, but we have to consider all three approaches, which are the cost approach, income approach, and the sale comparison approach. And once we determine the value, we have to verify that the taxes deriving from the value must be apportioned and assessed equally with no unjust discrimination. Now, if you look at the handout with the ratio analysis study, this is an example of the very first step that I go through to start determining valuation. And as a disclaimer, this is very raw data. Typically, I would not be doing this analysis for probably not 3 or 4 months. So these sales have not been reviewed and adjusted yet. But
So for the purpose of this exercise, we're assuming that all of that, we're going to pretend that all that's been done.
Sales are going to be qualified.
Okay.
So to run a ratio analysis study, we only use qualified sales. And these qualified sales are between July 1st, 2023 and June 30th, 2024. And what's a qualified sale? It's basically a sale that is considered to be an arm's length transaction, which means that the sale was not affected by either party's unreasonable or unusual influence, control, or motivation. That's the basic of it. There's more that we will break down even further, like private sales, sales that wasn't advertised, intercorporation transaction. Those won't be qualified either. These will be only qualified arm's length transaction will be part of this study. Next is average ratio. As you see in the study right now, the average ratio for these sales is 78%. My goal is to have it at between 91 and 92%. And the reason for that is because of the fluctuation in the market, at 91, 92%, our valuation won't be overvalued if the market shifts and drops. And at 91%, the state allowed me to have a 10% variance when I declare our ratio. So at 91% with a 10% variance of 9.1%, that would put me, I can declare that our assessment is at 100% of market. Next is the quality rating. Right now, it's at 17. The quality rating is a measurement of uniformity of local assessment practices. Basically, it's showing are our assessment equitable. The state requirement is that it cannot exceed 20 points. We are currently, these numbers are at 17, but historically we're between 12 and 13. Between 10 and 15 are where most assessors want to be at. Being in single digit would be very tough unless you're a small community with very little sales happening. Then it's easier for you to be able to have your assessment right at market because it's not changing. For other municipalities like ourselves, where there's a lot of sales going on, 10 to 15 points is where we want to be at.
What does that number mean? How's it calculated?
You're taking the average ratio and dividing it by the average standard deviation. Standard deviation is the range of changes in assessment ratio above and below the median ratio number. Average. And those current numbers, our average deviation right now is 13. Also, in your handout, you see the top and bottom are highlighted in yellow. The reason for those are outliers. In normal statistics, we use usually have a 25% outlier top and bottom, and we only use the median 50%. But for ratio study by the state, they only allow a 15% outliers, 15% above and 15% below, and we use the 7% median to do all of our calculations. Okay. All right. Once we have the valuation, the next step is actually fixing the tax rate, or we normally say send the mill rate. Send the mill rate is performed by myself, but really it's neither of us or all of us, because the mill rate is set based on taking the total tax levy and dividing it by the total taxable valuations. And if you look at the breakdown on the municipal side, that entails all the approved municipal appropriation, add into that the county taxes to pay out, and the education appropriation, give you the total appropriation. Then you deduct the anticipated revenues and reimbursement, giving you the total tax levy number. On the assessing side, we assess all real and personal properties. We deduct real estate exempted property values, deduct real estate exemptions, and deduct a Betty exemption from personal property, giving us a total taxable valuation.
What's a Betty?
This is equipment tax exemption. It's a tax exemption program for business personal properties where certain manufacturing equipment are exempt from taxes.
Thanks.
This is a comparison from FY24 and FY25, showing those numbers that we were just talking about, the appropriations, the deductions, and how we came about the mill rate, and the percentage, the dollar difference and percentage difference from year to year.
And that's a document that we're going to give you the whole presentation. Put it probably under assessment.
Close of business Monday will be on there. All right. After we set the mill rate, next part is this, the assessor must make a record of the assessment, which is basically our municipal valuation book. In the past, the assessors were responsible for it, but nowadays with the new computer system, actually I get this from Jessica. So I don't actually have to do it myself. Yep. But we still have to have it, and it has to be kept either by the assessor or the town clerk, and to be available for review by any taxpayer at request. Once we create the municipal valuation book, the assessor have to sign all the commitment forms and deliver the commitment to the tax collector. Basically, the commitment entails signing of the list of taxable properties, the certificate of commitment, certificate of assessment, and the collector's warrant. Once it's all signed and it's delivered to the tax collector, we are officially committed, and at that point, no additional funds can be raised.
Without a very lengthy, costly, and time-consuming process that no town ever wants to go through.
Which also involve the state. Once the taxes are committed, next part is abatement. For the taxpayer, they have 185 days from the date of commitment to request an abatement. And there's no exception to this. We had this situation where I checked with the state and they said no. 185 days, close of business on the 185th day, that's it. And for any abatement request to be approved, the assessment must be proven to be manifestly wrong What that means is that the assessment was either illegal. An example of an illegal assessment would be a taxpayer was assessed that they didn't own the property. So an irregularity in the assessment is, for example, a taxpayer was taxed twice, two different accounts, but there wasn't two accounts, it's just one. And the last one is if the assessment had errors. And errors is, again, just there was two houses, and we assessed them for 3. If one of those 3 conditions are not met, the fourth reason where an abatement are approved would be if the assessment was overvalued and the overvalue was greater than 10% of when it's compared to other similar properties. And it has to be similar, apples to apples. So if you have a ranch and you compare it to a mobile home, does not count. And finally, any abatement requests, the burden of proof is on the taxpayer. Basically, if you come in and you say that your assessment is too high or your tax is too high, that's not the reason. You have to prove it. It's on the taxpayer to prove it, not the assessor.
If they do get it.
Cost?
If it's a burden of proof is proven?
No.
If they.
Meaning if they hire an attorney to prove it?
So,
A personal tax assessment.
so one of the things that we kind of look at is there's an informal process and a formal process, right? So if somebody has a concern with their tax bill and they feel like their property has been overvalued or they've been assessed for things that they shouldn't be assessed with, the first step is to go to Min's webpage and click on the fancy thing he has there so that you can schedule a 30-minute meeting with him and go over your property. And if you bring something to his attention, like you really didn't have the 3 decks and the outdoor sauna and whatever else that he assessed you for, then that's an error, and he would make a correction of that. When we get to burden of proof, that is when you bring everything to his attention and he says, nope, I think my assessment is perfectly fine. That's when you go to the local Board of Assessment Review because you don't agree. You have so many days after he renders a decision to then apply for an appeal, essentially. And at that point, that is where when you walk into that meeting and Min's job is to lay out why Min's job is to actually respond to. The taxpayer's job is to go in and explain very clearly why Min is wrong and why a certain amount of property needs to be abated. With all of these abatements, when we talked about overlay, if Min made a mistake or we had issued an abatement of, let's say, $300 worth of tax, that is where we get the $300 out of overlay to balance our books, because our books are counting on that $300 coming in, right?
I think the question is more about the cost of proving and the burden of proof where, say, if they hire an attorney to represent them, no, that cost is not reimbursed if the abatement is approved. And for FY25, right now, the abatement deadline is March 20th, 2025, since we committed September 16th, 2024. That's 185 days. So on the assessor side, the assessor can grant an abatement within 1 year from the date of commitment. The municipality cannot vote to direct the assessor to grant specific abatements. And the permissible abatements that an assessor can approve are overvaluation, illegal, irregular, or erroneous assessment. Within the abatement process, specifically for personal property, we send out a notice for request for a list of assets. If that notification is not responded upon, and or they just decide not to send us the list, they can be barred from appeal from any assessment that we put on it. That also goes with any other abatement process where if the assessor send out a notification for further clarification or data request and it is not responded, they can be barred from the abatement process as well. And the reason I said they can be is because original statute, the 706A statute, originally it stated that they will be barred, and it was too strict, so it was changed to they can be barred. And the stipulation is that if they did not respond to the original request during their abatement application, they submit the information with and giving us a satisfactory reason why they couldn't give us that data when we requested initially. And it has to be a good reason. They were out of town, they just forgot, would not qualify. And last entity that has to do with abatement are the municipal officers. Municipal officers can grant an abatement between 1 and 3 years from the date of commitment, except for they cannot grant an abatement to correct an error in valuation. An error in valuation can only be corrected by the assessor. Basically, when you vote to grant an abatement, it is basically all or nothing. You can't, for example, disagree with the valuation and say they should be half the value and grant an abatement for half. So it's all or nothing. The different type of abatements that municipal officers are allowed to grant are illegal, irregular, or erroneous assessment, hardship or poverty, inability to pay after 2 years. This is the abatement where we have something on the books for greater than 2 years that can't be collected, and you approve that to remove it from the books. And the last one is minor amounts. This is pertaining to personal property accounts where the value is so low that it will cost more of a financial burden to us to collect, that you can vote to have it removed. All right. So that's pretty much start to end of the process. Now, we had a couple of taxpayer concerns, issues brought up that I figured we will address right now. The first one was a taxpayer stated that sale prices are much higher than the assessment on it, and that the assessment value of these properties should match their sale price. And by not doing so, it creates an inequity in the assessment, and a full revaluation must be performed. The taxpayer is correct. The sale price does dictate fair market value, which, but unfortunately, the process of the assessor changing an assessment based off sale price is very rarely, if ever, done. The reason for that is, based off of a 1981 court case, Shaman versus Kennebunkport, the court ruled that a recent sale price of a property is evidence of market value for tax purposes, but by doing so, the property owner that we change that price to will have grounds to apply for an abatement based on inequity of the assessment when they compared their property against other similar properties that weren't adjusted because they they weren't sold recently.
When it comes to, Min, the idea that when we're talking about chasing sales, which is a no-no, you have to, Min gave you a copy of a property card, and what you'll notice on these cards is there are all sorts of data points in them, right? And each of those data points correspond to a cost schedule.
Yes, actually, we.
Oh, we're going to get to that. Never mind. All right, I'm sorry. Sorry. Number 3.
All right, number 3. Disregarding the current drastic market fluctuation, typical difference between the sale price and the assessment are based on the accuracy of the property data or information. And because of this, the commonly accepted practice of assessors is to use the recent sale information to verify and to update the information in our CAMA system to make sure that what is being calculated for the assessment is correct and with updated information, not using the sale price as the baseline. Number 4, the town valuation is adjusted annually. We do this, and not all municipality does this. Some municipality will only adjust their assessment valuation every reval, 8, 10, 12 years. We do it every single year. We look at the market, see what the market trend is, and adjust our valuation every year.
Why do towns choose to do that? Is it just,
It's cheaper and less labor intensive.
what's best practice for the industry?
Do it every year. There's for 2 reasons. If you're up to date, you don't need to pay for a reval. And number 2 is if there's fluctuation in the market, their taxpayer won't feel a big burden. The adjustment will be marginal.
So in theory, it's more accurate.
Yes.
And it's
Yes and no, because it's if you don't do don't do market adjustments, your valuation is there, and then you're going to have to factor depending on what the market's doing. And with factoring, it affects the taxpayers' exemptions. For example, if you don't adjust your valuations, and with the market, you're rather than being at 100% to market, you're at 95. At 95% of market, you have to adjust all your exemptions. So for a homestead exemption of $25,000, you won't get that. The taxpayer won't get that. They only get 95% of it. So that's $23,750 of exemption rather than the full $25,000.
so would it be fair to say 50 or 60 years ago, you wouldn't be able to update in the way you do now every year?
Correct.
Because you have the capability of computerization.
Depending on the size of your municipality, yes. So
it's based on
labor intensive.
It's based on assumptions that are made to manipulate the numbers, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Just trying to get an understanding of.
And because of us updating annually, we don't need to, as of right now, we don't need to do reval. And we take a conservative estimate of doing a reval right now, probably in the range of about $500,000. And with that, if we elect to do one for 2026, FY26 budget, we'll have a 20 cents mill rate impact just for the revaluation. And this is just me, there was a comment where I just sit back and click a couple buttons and told the taxpayer that his valuation looked accurate. That's true. The reason was, at that moment, I can click a couple buttons, but all the work before to make sure our cost tables and our cost models are accurate gave me that ability to just make a couple clicks and verify if assessment is accurate or not. And the second concern that was brought up was the inequity between different wards in the tax burden. It was brought up by Mr. Anzurini, and I agree with his numbers. His numbers are accurate. He got the data from myself. Where he and I disagree on is his interpretation of what the data is representing. He is stating that the numbers shows there's a problematic inequality of the property assessment within the town, which results in inequitable tax burden from one ward to another. My opinion, his data does not show a inequity in tax burden. It actually shows and identify areas within each ward for potential focus on increased development. He took the data I gave him and oversimplified and extracted a per unit cost. And then with that, he believed that the data shows inequity in taxes, which it doesn't, because when you're comparing items and you have a larger amount to divide it by, yes, your per unit cost will be lower. But it doesn't show that there's inequity in the tax burden. It just shows there's a difference in quantities from one to the other.
Min, give the example, because that's kind of an overreaching, or that's a high-level statement. So specifically, I think Peter was talking about land.
Land, yep.
Yeah, so talk about
So if
land.
you have, say, two pieces of property, one has 10 acres, the other has 2 acres. The 2 acres is assessed, say, $110,000. The 10 acres is assessed at about $160,000. And when you break it down to per unit, it shows that the 10-acre property is paying less per unit in taxes, and the smaller property has a bigger burden. What the data doesn't show is that he took the overall assessed value and just divided by the quantity. And if you have a larger quantity, your per unit cost will always be lower. He didn't take into account how that total value was calculated. And for land are calculated not just based off overall size, but the primary acreage is assessed at a different rate. And then anything beyond 1 acre is assessed at a excess land use rate. For example, if a property is completely average, the first acre of land would be assessed as about $150,000, and excess acreage beyond that would be at $8,500. So for a 10-acre property, the assessment of $150,000 plus $85,000, $230-something thousand, compared to a 2-acre, which is $108,000. So if you just take those two total assessed value divided by the quantity, yes, the other property will be less.
But again, you're tying it to the fair market, right?
Correct.
So in the fair market, 2 acres of a developed property would run for about that much money, whereas 10 acres would run, it's not a multiplier.
Right.
Yes.
Are you comparing built property or just the land?
We're talking about just the land right now.
So doesn't the building
Totally different assessment.
On that land have some valuation
Yes,
to land that's empty?
yes. Right now, we're just talking about 2 vacant, empty lots. But if you're talking about developed lot with a building on it, if you look at your tax bill, you see that your assessment is broken down to building value and land value. And so there will be separate calculation for it as well. So just to wrap it up, it's basically what I'm saying is that his number is accurate, but his interpretation of what is representing is not. It's not representing a inaccuracy or a inaccuracy in tax burden. It's more inaccuracy in. Actually, it is an inaccuracy in tax burden from between one ward to another, but that inequity is not based on the valuation. It's based on what is developed. We can't bring it up to equity by looking at a piece of property saying, oh, you got 10 acres. You have more value if you break it all down to individual lots. We can't do that by statute. We have to assess as is as of April 1st. And to give that example, this is a property record card for Town Hall. And at the very bottom, you can see how land are assessed. And as you see, for Town Hall, it has 1.38 acres, but there's 2 land lines. First line is, like I said, the primary, the first acre. And for it is, the unit price for it is roughly about $2.4 million per acre. And anything beyond that is only at $7,700. So if you just, like I said, if you just took the total assessment and just broke it down by acreage, it's not a fair representation of how land are assessed.
Why is it done for the first acre and then everything else? I mean, is that just everybody does it that way?
It's based on the assessor. There's some municipality where the primary acreage is based on the minimum lot size to be built. Historically, Freeport, we've always gone with the very first acre. And as long as we're consistent, then it's legal.
What do you know? What percentage of municipalities use 1 acre versus the minimum building size?
I've been with 4 municipalities, and 3 of the 4 use 1 acre, and 1 use minimum lot size. And the majority goes with the 1 acre. The reason is, if you go with minimum lot size, if there's any zoning changes and so forth, all of a sudden you have to readjust everything. So to be more conformative, you go with just a set size.
Thanks.
And as you can see, when I said his numbers were oversimplified, the reason for that is I can look at the land. To calculate the land, there's multiple factors that is involved. The use code, the use of the land, the size, the influence factor, the site index, the condition factor, the neighborhood, and where it's located within the town also has a factor in the calculation. So just by taking the valuation divided by the unit doesn't clearly represent the valuation of the land.
Do you mind talking a little bit about all those pieces that you spoke about and just giving us a little bit more detail as to, like, is it proximity to the center of town, or is it proximity to the ocean, or is it proximity to transportation, or?
That is where the neighborhood is. The neighborhood adjustment is based on where in the town is. And that is calculated by, once we get the sales ratio, we'll break it down even further to a segregated study where we look at just waterfront and see where their valuation is, and then we compare that to the median. The median is the middle, and then your neighborhood adjustment factor would be above or below that median. Same goes with the condition factor. So if you really break down, you say neighborhood factor of your assessment for town, your neighborhood factor affect how where you are within the town, what region you are. Your condition, your site index, compare within that region your property to other similar properties within that region, and then your condition factor affects your particular parcel, and if there's any consideration to be given, such as wetland topography or contaminations.
You're paying $30,000 in taxes, right? And maybe that goes up because the value of the sales of those homes, next year it's 35,000. That increase of 5,000 on the ocean front also affects everybody else in the town in a ratio?
So understand, we tried to picture at the beginning is that taxes are an outcome of value. So it's not, taxes go up for a variety of reasons that don't have anything to do with your value.
Right, you mentioned
So
that's right.
valuation, take it on valuation, man.
Basically, you want your value to go up. It's the taxes that you're concerned about. And assessing, we have nothing to do with taxes. We are only dealing in values. So if the market shows that the value in certain neighborhood are going up, yes, your valuation will go up.
But Min, if you've had 1 or 2 sales along the waterfront, is that enough for you to then adjust the sales?
No. For a ratio study to meet state standards, you have to have a minimum of 12 qualified sales to run a ratio study. So for the study I gave you, we have 101 sales, but within that, if there was at least 12 sales that's happening within the waterfront, then I would do a segregated study looking at just the waterfront and make an adjustment on just the waterfront.
So let's say we don't have 12 sales. Let's say we have 5 sales in year 1, 5 sales in year 2, and 5 sales in year 3, and they're all way over our assessment. Can you use those sales?
Yes, if within the 1 year time frame for the study, there's not enough sale, I can expand the time frame to 2 years to 2.5 years. Beyond that,
What's the limit, 2.5 years?
there's no state limit, but typically we won't go beyond 2 years because at that point, the market would have been completely different.
Did we just lose Tom?
We just lost it.
While he's doing that, can I just follow up on that? So if there are 12 sales within a year on the waterfront, that won't affect the valuation of a house in town that's not on the waterfront?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can repeat it. So if there are 12 sales within a year on the waterfront, and you do a segregated study,
Yep.
that won't affect the valuation of a lot in town if it's segregated
Correct.
that way. It's unlikely that would happen.
It
but-
will probably affect, but won't be significant. Because once I can be able to do multiple segregated studies, I'll break down the updates values based on that characteristic.
For that neighborhood.
Yes, so like last year, I looked at, we had enough sales for interior, waterfront, mobile homes, and condos. And adjustment I made reflect each individual sections.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, interior waterfront mobile homes and what was the last?
Condos.
Continue on. This is
And the last slide was on the property record card showing how we come up with valuation of the buildings. And if you take a look at it, you see that there are multiple factors involved. And there's multiple factors involved in calculating the building. Everything on the left-hand side, the style, the grade, what type of roof it has, what type of material is used. Each one of those factors has its own cost table that we reference to come up with the calculation. And then on top of that, I also factor in depreciation. There's a depreciation cost table that of how much we depreciate that property value per year.
Are the cost tables developed locally or regionally, or is it just a national cost table?
It's a cost table developed by the assessor based off of a national standard by Marsh and Swift. Marsh and Swift, we can it will break down national value, regional value, state value, and depend on how big your town or city is, city value. And for us, it breaks down to Portland. And then from there, we have to then adjust it to our own municipality. So,
You're doing.
yes.
You're doing those calculations based
Correct.
on trends of
And-
data nationally.
Yes.
Yep.
And that is why with market adjustments, if it's based on what the market's doing, those adjustments you see in the land. The reason for that is by using Marsh and Swift, the building value is a constant. That building will be built and will be assessed exactly the same no matter where it's located in the town. But with the market adjustment, it's based on the location. So that's where market adjustment change, you see it change on the land value rather than on the building value. And
Percentage of, like if Portland is this price, what, your percentage lower? Or
oh no, it's not by percentage. It'll be, we will go out and I'll start talking with contractors, seeing what they're charging for per square footage of construction costs is, and then work that into each cost table and and then once I got that, that's my cost model, and then I have to take that and put into the properties and see if it adjusts accordingly to the current market. So it's not just a set percentage.
Is it granular enough where, like, you would input, let's say, a home with 3,400 square feet, and you'd get one sort of calculated value, and if you had a home that was 3,425, it's going to have a different one, or is it?
It's different, but it won't be much. Each cost table is calculated on a curve. So with that small of a difference, no, you won't see much.
The other factor that we see quite a bit or hear quite a bit are concerns from residents about, gee, I haven't sided my house, or I don't mow my lawn, or I haven't put a new rug in. And so could you talk a little bit about why that doesn't influence the rate as much as people might think?
Yes, that's because those are more maintenance. Those are any negative effect on the property, but it's a curable, fixable effect, so it won't be that much of a factor in the calculations. That also goes true with, say, if you resize your home. Some people think if I do anything, my assessment go up. No. And again, this is be dependent on different assessors. For myself, resigning a home, adding new windows, those are maintenance, maintain the property. It's not improvements, so there won't be an increase in valuation just for maintenance work. And with those, I look at the permit that was brought in and how much you put in. If you're doing updating your kitchen, but you're just basically replacing the exact same thing for newer material, no. But if you're replacing your kitchen and all brand new granite countertops, hardwood flooring, all brand new high-end cabinetry, yes, that will have an effect on the valuation, but it will be quite marginal because from that, the adjustment I'll change in my camera system will be the building condition, and the change from average to say good. That would require that for myself require you to have changed the cost that you put into that change has to be at least 50% or more than what the current value of that building is for me to make that change. If not, then I will consider it as a maintenance. And then the next level, you have poor, fair, average, good, excellent. Poor, there shouldn't be any property that has a poor condition unless it has been condemned. Meaning the building's still there, you still be assessed, but it's condemned, can't live there, so it's poor condition. Fair is has been maintained. There's repairs need to be done on it. It can be fair, but it's still livable. Average is average. Good is, like I said, if you have an old home where you made an improvement and the improvement cost you put into it was 50% or more of the current assessed value of that building. If for excellent condition, you must have put in renovation costs of that exceed 75%. That's how I built the table for us. 75% of the current assessed value of the building. So basically, if you have a home that's assessed at 100,000, you would your condition after your renovation would not be excellent unless you have put 75,000 or more into the renovation.
I understand going up. The question is, can you go down? So if, say, they've owned their house for 15, 20 years, they haven't done any improvements, or somebody bought a very nice house and didn't put in good quality things, they were getting cheap, maybe good plumbing, all of that, does the assessment go down?
It will depend. So you look at the condition, age of the building, and compare that to other similar property at similar age. So say a 50-year-old home, condition, both homes didn't do anything. One, there's no repair needed. The other one, there are repair needed. Yes, then the one that repair needed will be just down to a fair, because we're comparing similar properties and see where they fall within the median.
Any other questions from the council? Peter?
Okay, so I'm not really, I don't want to be an assessor, okay? I've been a cost accountant for years, so I understand the distribution of costs, which is really what taxation and the assessment process is. What I started with, and Ming was very helpful to give me the data, so I'm not just giving anybody grief about it. But I want to know when the last time the valuation, a revaluation has been done in town, which I believe is like 20 some odd years ago, even longer.
2014?
Was it done 10 years ago? A full revaluation? Okay. So in 10 years, what happened in that revaluation, I don't know what type it was, but you have three things that are obvious, right? You said you look at cost, income, and sales.
Correct.
So when you look at cost, you don't go back, I've owned my house for 40 years, right? You don't go back 40 years and look to see where it started, right? You look at the market now, which is really sales. So when we say, cost, income, income might be for a business, but really you're talking sales, right?
Yes, but that does take in consideration because that number, your cost, so say 50-year-old home, it was one rate that year, but the consideration is in the depreciation. So you did get depreciation of that value. So that's where the age adjustments in.
If I was a business, I'd get depreciation. As a person, I wouldn't. But my point
You
is,
do get it in the valuation. You're not assessed of brand new home as a brand new home.
Let me bring it back up here. So my 3 points were, I did ward analysis, and it looked like we had an issue, right? Different wards paid for the town budget more than other wards. I then broke it down into use. And if you look at the use consideration that you have in your files, there are some areas that are much more expensive and some areas that are much cheaper. Some type of land is, based on your analysis of 7,700 as opposed to the first acre, right? So there are pieces of land that are 40-acre lots that they pay very little compared to my half an acre lot, which I pay more than they do with 40 acres. So the question is, okay, so the first point is ward discrepancy. The second question is the use discrepancies within the use code. So if you look at the use code, you'll see District 2, District 3, District 4, or Ward 2, 3, and 4. And you'll see discrepancies within that ward. Then when you take it, and I took the 100 samples, and when you look at the samples and you go down the row, you'll see, that one person has 6 acres and it's valued at $200,000, and one person has half an acre and it's valued at $248,000, right? So that is what I brought to the council, right? I know we've had conversations about budgets and spending, so I think that's what Jessica's about. But there's also discrepancies within these models. So if you're trying to convince me that there's fairness in the assessment value, and I'm not saying anything about Ming, this has been 10 years of accumulation. Oh, we need this much more tax, or we need to distribute this much more tax, so I'm going to raise it a little bit more. I'm going to, I'm just telling you that from a taxpayer, I look at the data, and I'm telling you that there's definitely not fairness in the process. That's all. Thank you very much.
Just something on that point. When the statement you had about you need more taxes so the valuations increase, absolutely false. The reason I can say that is the council does not see what my valuation would be during the budgeting process. It's totally separate.
I do want to be mindful of time because we have Jessica here for her part of the presentation. I know that you two have been talking quite consistently about this, and I do want to think about if there are solutions you would like to propose.
I would. So one last point. I've measured what I've been taxed for 20 years, and it's always been around $6,500. The valuation went down, the mill rate went up. The mill rate goes down, the evaluation goes up. I recognize that the town needs X amount of money to operate. I'm okay with that. But understand, and my point is only fairness. So my recommendation is that we would spend, instead of trying to spend, $100,000 for a study, that we would spend $500,000 and do a full revaluation of the town.
Okay. Thank you.
I just have one question. Would there be some value in recalibrating the assumptions by doing a revaluation? In other words, there are assumptions that allow you to get to every year a current value for the
I
town.
am not against revaluations. The reason is, with every revaluation, it's less work for me, because it's an outside company that's doing the work that I'm putting in. But what I'm against is using that cost to hire the revaluation for them to come in to do what we are already currently doing. I don't see that as a good use of funds.
So 20-plus years ago, when they did revals, whether they were interior, internal or external, everybody you'd have your calendar and everybody's home would get a visit, and you'd go into the home and you'd look at it and you'd say, oh, wow, we didn't know that you put this in or that in. The issue that I just went through a reval that cost a town, they tried to do it internally and got some of the data and then did the cleanup. They went external, and it cost almost $300,000 with much less residential property than we have here. That town didn't have property cards like this at all. They didn't have any data. The issue that we ran into, hoping to get all of this data, is that when you go out and you hire these companies, they don't go into every house.
They can't.
They can't. They can't, and people don't let them in. And so when somebody puts a deck on, we either catch it because they are nice and do what they're supposed to do and fill out a building permit, or we are using more and more aerial photography to do calculations and pick up decks that weren't there, how much construction has actually happened.
Or, for example, docks. I used aerial photography this past year in this commitment and found docks that we were never assessed. I believe about 60 or 70 of them, and assessed all the docks.
So one thing I'm kind of gathering from this presentation, right? There's levers you can pull. There's levers that are the state that can pull. There's assumptions that you can make as our assessor, and I am inclined to trust our staff here in town, but this could be something our future finance committee looks at. What are those assumptions that you're making, and talking through them and understanding them? I don't know if that would sort of help create a little bit more transparency and understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to, this has been fascinating. I'd love to keep going on it. And perhaps to Peter's point, my takeaway from this is that there's an incredible level of nuance in comparison of properties, but at the same time, we're talking about it a little bit theoretical. I'd love to see an actual comparison between 4 different properties and talk through all the details of it. And perhaps I would give Peter a little bit more of a sense of understanding and just comfort with the process, because this has been great, and I'd love to just get more into the weeds on it. Sure. But we do need to be mindful of the rest of the programming. But perhaps maybe that's a next step, that we can put this on another agenda and then do a comparison and really dive into the details and talk about what makes these things seemingly look much different than each other, but where the rubber hits the road. Yeah. Maybe that's a next step we could do.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. If that's okay with you, for sure. I think, we've talked about the finance committee for some time now, and I do want to be clear, it's not because we want to change the way you're doing things or meddle necessarily. It's just, I think, a good way for us to learn and understand.
Totally fine
as a
with that.
property owner myself, yeah.
Like everyone knows, I'm very transparent with my numbers. You can inspect it at any time.
I just want to thank you. You clearly have a command and a mastery of this, and we appreciate having you and putting this level of effort and detail into it and helping us better understand it, just so we can help answer questions. So, but the key takeaway, right? I have to keep mowing my lawn. It's really not going to make a difference.
I'm really bad at mowing my lawn, so
Actually,
I'm glad to know that.
I take it back. It can make a difference, but not to you, but to maybe to your neighbors, where there's external issues that affect their values. Yep.
You don't count goats and sheep, right?
Actually, I can assess those.
Thank you very much, Min. I really appreciate you taking the time. Quickly, yes. It'd be great if you did, so we can get it on the record. And again, quickly, because I want to make sure we respect Jessica's time.
It's a quick answer. You mentioned, as Peter brought up, income is part of that. And that's for businesses, I'm assuming.
Nope. Like I said, every single valuation, all three approaches has to be considered. And the key word is considered. So when I look at residential property, there's no income. So I considered the income approach, but there's no data for it. So it's been excluded. I didn't use, and I used the cost approach.
But you do use income if it's a home business, no?
No.
No, okay. That's what I wanted to know.
All right, well, we will have further conversation with our finance committee, and I look forward to that. I agree, this has been really fascinating. And I think we're ready to move on to your presentation, Jessica.
Perfect. So I'm going to take you through an overview of the budget process. Hopefully we can get through what we do for a budget process and the preparation, talk about our budget review and prioritization, what we have for public engagement opportunities, what we're looking for in FY26 to make for potential changes, as well as to provide you with an update on where we stand with the town's fund balance and other notable trends that we monitor, and hopefully have some time for questions if needed. So our budget process, we use a strategic framework to manage the operations of the town. It helps to provide clarity, direction, and balance to help us achieve our long-term plans while focusing on what we can control with short-term actions. And so that framework is really 5 key elements. Primarily starting with a comprehensive plan, if you had to pick a spot to start with, it is circular. But we start with a comprehensive plan, which generates a long-term plan for the community, which then we derive an operating budget annually, which in turn corresponds into programs and services that we deliver, which we then evaluate and report on, and kind of start the whole process over again. So that's kind of like our cycle. And when we develop the budget and we approve that, it's really that's the financing piece of delivering those programs, and it's that plan that supports what you establish as initiatives to make progress towards achieving those goals. And so we currently are engaging residents to update our comprehensive plan, which was previously done in 2011. This is where residents get the opportunity to outline the direction they would like the community to move in, identifying or defining the unique identity that makes our town succeed now and into the future. And it, creates that comprehensive plan. In 2011, the priorities that were outlined was to be a desirable place to live, responsible stewards of the environment, have a strong and stable economy, work on transportation and growth. So that's kind of what's been driving staff's focus since 2011, is to kind of hit those key marks. This is kind of our governance model. So we start with residents, as they're the receiver of our services. They provide public input, much like the meeting tonight and your standard council meetings, where you receive that information. You would then typically delegate to a committee or handle it as a council yourself to provide feedback to the town manager, who then works with staff and administration to be able to deliver those programs back out to the residents. And again, it's a very cyclical process. So when we talk about budget preparation, an annual budget document should include financial information, goals and objectives. We try to lay out prospective revenues and expenditures and explain any service level changes. And it should translate community needs and priorities into what we're offering for services. And a budget should also provide short and long-term fiscal content to help you with your decision making. So from a quick perspective, if you wanted to go to the website and look at the FY25 budget document, I kind of highlighted where you find those necessities or key points within a budget to help you apply them to the current budget doc that we just went through. So I'm not going to, I don't have it to pull up for you, but I just wanted to be able to, this will be on the website, much like Min's presentation, and give people the opportunity to go to particular pages and see what is being referenced and how we're meeting those objectives to create this budget doc for you. So our process begins in January. Staff will submit their budget requests based on their anticipated needs and priorities over the next 5 years, and that's the capital component. We're actually starting to work on that now behind the scenes. We will present to council in February the capital improvement plan, and there will be a public hearing on that in April. Our operating budget process begins in March. We begin the process of revenue forecasting and analyzing much earlier than that. So I'll be starting that probably within the next 3 weeks. But we go through that budget and we review it with the town manager for any adjustments based on what she's seeing for strategic goals and council priorities based on discussions that you have here during your meetings. We present that in April, the operating budget to you in April, and we have some public informal Q&As with department heads in May, with a public hearing on the operating budget, capital budget, TIF budgets in June. And it all comes to a target adoption date by that second meeting in June, because if a budget is not adopted by the end of June, it defaults to what the manager has proposed for a budget at the beginning of the process. So as far as behind the scenes with staff, both all around prior to and during the schedule that was just laid out to you, the town manager and finance and department heads are all working together to compile those budgets and fine tune the numbers and get work with the feedback that we're given to prioritize and provide the appropriate levels of service and levels that are desired by both council and the residents that we're hearing. For public engagement opportunities, we actually have many opportunities for the public to engage. We have public comment period during each of your council meetings throughout the year, as well as in particularly during the budget process. We have capital improvement plan workshops throughout the month of March with a public hearing in April. We have operating budget workshops both in the months of May and June, along with, as I referenced, the informal question and answer sessions with department heads in May. We offer both a morning and an evening informal session for residents that may not be comfortable being in a public forum to ask questions or seek their answers. So we offer those informal sessions for them to come in and talk with us one-on-one to get those questions answered for them. And we also have the operating budget public hearing in June as well. For FY26, we're actually looking to implement a few changes. With the acceptance of Zoom as a platform, we're looking to offer that as an informal public engagement session for those that may not be able to physically make it in during the times that are offered and might find it easier to either be at home or at work on a computer where they can pop in and ask a question. So we're hoping to build that into the budget schedule this year. We've also added additional workshops on different evenings to help encourage participation for the public. So you'll see that in the proposed schedule as well. And internally, from a staff perspective, I'll be working with department heads to obtain their accomplishments and goals and objectives earlier in the budget year so that we can be at the forefront of the budget process to be able to supply those to you in a more timely fashion and help maybe guide some of the budget discussions. Are there any questions so far on the budget process? I know I kind of went through a little quick, but I'm sorry, it's just, it's what I live and breathe through the day, so it just feels like a natural flow. So if you have questions, I'll pause at this point if you have questions on anything that I've just thrown out for the budget process. As long as it's okay with the committee, I will.
I think Councillor Pillsbury has a question.
No, I was just going to say, thanks for being flexible on offering like Zoom sessions and other ways for the public to interact. That's important.
Yeah, so that was a great suggestion by Sophie, so I thought that was great.
Peter, go ahead.
Just a quick question. In 2018, we started doing cost drivers for the budget. Are we still doing that, or that's gone by the wayside?
Within the budget doc, there are performance measures listed for each
And that's
department,
the
and we
driver.
continually
Okay.
work on them. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other, we're good? Okay. So I'm going to pop over to some trends and notable budget items that I just kind of thought would be good to showcase for you. So the first one is a historical look at our revenue sharing. Just to show you, since 2010, I had data easily accessible from that point to see it hasn't always been a high sharing. We've just recently started to see over the last 5 years an increase in the state meeting their obligation to fully fund revenue sharing at its full 5%. So, once that was adhered to by the state, it really brought a significant influx to municipalities for revenue, and it came at a great time that we really needed it. So I just thought it was important to make note that they were doing that.
It's interesting, having come from the north, to see how little revenue sharing towns in the south get. But the thing that's important to remember is the 5% aspect is huge, because we were cut down in the 2014. You see the big dip down. That's when they decided to cut it all the way back to 1.2%. But revenue sharing is not a guarantee. We put it in the budget. It is an estimate. It is 5% based on the collections that the state actually has. The other thing you have to be careful about with the legislature, they've been known to go in and not change the 5%, but take a raid. So you can have 5%, we'll put that in the pot, but then we're going to immediately take a flat number of dollars out of it. So it's a vulnerability that we have based on our state lawmakers and also what the state economy is doing.
Absolutely.
Is that, I assume the formula takes into account the valuation, so a richer town would get less money than a poorer town of the otherwise equal?
The revenue sharing pot is actually divided in two. There's Rev 1 and Rev 2.
Correct.
And there's one set of calculations for Rev 1, and that's a value and a formula that includes valuation and population. In Rev, and your commitment falls in there somehow. In Rev 2, it is the deviation from a set amount of mills. So if your mill rate is over 11, you get more. In the town I was in before, when our mill rate was 2809, and we had a low valuation because we had so much tax exempt property, we were we were slated to collect almost double what Freeport collects. And most of that came from Rev 2.
I'm trying to remember if there was another point I wanted to make on this, but it is, nope, that's perfectly fine. It is a state-driven number. They have a whole analytical spreadsheet that they do, and each municipality obtains their budgeted figure from that analysis. It's not an analysis we do in-house.
Is that trend line typical for the whole state?
Yes.
Okay.
The other one I found interesting was for interest income. I know it's been a topic of discussion with the counselors historically, where we stand. And this really, I wanted to go back far because the budget document that you receive, typically I just show 5 years worth just because of space constraints and time. But for this presentation, I really wanted to go back a little bit further to show you, because what a lot of you were seeing was this drop in interest income that was concerning, right? But I felt it important to show that there's been a history of low interest income because we have to be stewards of public funds. The first priority is safety of principal when it comes to public funds. Anything else that you can do is icing on the cake, but the first priority has to be the security of that principle. But we've made some changes within our account structures and have been able to see some pretty dramatic growth in what we're earning for interest income by making some minor changes that are still within the policy and meet the needs of securing public funds.
So I'm just going to highlight the word that Jessica just used, which is policy, because being stewards of the public funds is probably one of your most important jobs. And so you create a policy, and it is Jessica's job to ensure that we maintain compliance with that. And her job to tell me I need to be more conservative. But that might be something when we think about finance committee that you might just want to review so you understand what her constraints are. Because there are times that municipal earnings really don't make sense in the market based on the way we have to invest. So.
Yeah, we're definitely not as free or flexible as personal investments, for sure. The next item I had was just a kind of a historical budget review. So this is looking at both the town and the school budgets since 2014. Ironically enough, both the budgets have increased approximately 37% from 2014 to now. That equates to just $2.7 million for the town and $8.4 million for the school. So I found it interesting that from a trend perspective, I was kind of surprised to see us both having increased 37%. Obviously, the dramatic differences in the actual value of what that is. But it just goes for me to show how little of the pie you actually have control over as council when residents have questions or concerns about their tax bill, right? And so,
do you have any idea how that compares to inflation over that same 10-year period?
We can grab that.
yeah, we can grab that. I'm trying to remember quickly when I think about CPI, there are CPI graphs within the budget doc, so if you were to look online, it's primarily used in conjunction with when we talk about wage increases, because that's our primary driver as a municipal government. But the inflation has, I would want to speak with it.
Sure.
So I'll graph that and send it out or add it to this for the website. And this is just a graph similar to what the auditor provides, which is just a historical look of our fund balance, broken down by the unassigned, assigned, committed, and non-spendable buckets, I'll call them, that make up total fund balance. So it's just to kind of give you a historical look of the consistency of what your fund balance looks like. I break it down further here with this next slide on just the unassigned component of the fund balance, where we're currently at 5.6 million. And you can kind of see, so the biggest jump from 2020 to 2022, is primarily from the impacts of COVID, right? Where a lot of things were shut down and a lot of services were not expended, right? And the alignment of that from a budgetary perspective to show, this kind of coincides with how budgets work, because you can only have 1.5 months according to your policy of budget in your unassigned fund balance. So that's why you kind of see the dipping go, because if you get too high, we have to bring it back down into policy, or when it's growing, it's because you're within those policy limits and we're able to kind of keep it there. So from a historical perspective on that, I think that's all I wanted. Do you have any questions for me on any of those trends, or I will make a note to add an inflation comparison? We flip-flopped.
So we brought Jessica here simply because I know that part of one of the questions that came up was around our budget process, and kind of feeling like we were pushing through some places and people didn't have a lot of information with some of the feedback I got. And I want to make sure that while we maintain those roles and responsibilities, and we don't want council getting into the weeds of how many sponges did we buy, but on the other hand, I think I said earlier, one of your most important duties is to be the stewards of the money, right? So we want to make sure as we move forward that the process that we're looking to engage in is one that council wants. I'd rather get feedback on the front end as opposed to after we've done an incredibly heavy lift for all of staff and then find out that we didn't hit a mark. That's kind of what I'm looking for here. And so in response to what we've heard, and also I cannot tip my hat enough to Jessica. She does much better finance director than I was. And together, I think we make a formidable team. But talking with her, one of the things that came up, especially with newer people on council, is she has an award-winning budget based on best practices for municipal government, but that budget all comes together after you pass the budget. What you get are the docs, the money pieces, and a very nice, I'm glad I don't have to write that anymore, a very nice memo that talks about why things have gone up in price or down in price. And
You probably get about 80 to 85% of the full budget doc at the beginning of the budget process.
what you miss is the narrative that if you don't understand what a public works department does, it's really hard for you to understand where those dollars are coming from, or why we need almost $1 million in payroll for that department. So the work that goes into that document is incredible. But what we're doing is we're kind of pulling it back to try to get more of that out. There will still be elements that, quite frankly, she can't get done until you pass a budget, because there is a little bit of a circularness to it. But the goal will be for people to have more information. We also know that there are some summary budget sheets that people are looking for to more quickly be able to look at the departments and see who's up, who's down. There are personnel charts in the final budget. Council hadn't asked for those before. You are now, so we'll include that with the first set of numbers that give you the delta between, gives you 5-year trend, Jessica, is that how you do it?
Most things in the budget doc are based on 5 years, yeah.
So that will give you a sense of kind of where we're coming from. If you don't take the time to read the memo that gives the kind of introduction of the budget, the numbers are not going to make a lot of sense. So that is, in my opinion, one of the most important pieces to get some of the history in it. So we've done that. Then,
Can I just offer an opinion there?
yeah,
For me, my personal opinion, I appreciate getting the meat, the numbers, and having the focus beyond that. I view the document as being a nice archive. So this is what we did over the year. It's a great public document that I think it makes it more explainable to the public. I don't need that. I'd rather focus Jessica's energy and your energy on the 100 questions that we're hopefully going to be asking you between the time we start talking about the budget and when we pass it, and spend the rest, after it's passed and things kind of calm down a bit, we can spend time making it award-winning and all that. So I just don't want to divert any energy from how it's already working well.
I think that I hear what you're saying, and it's probably not going to look as awesome, but I do think it's important for counselors to be able to understand what the goals are, because that is us communicating with you about how we intend to spend the money. And, yeah, so.
Yeah, I'll just say my opinion, like, it's
Yeah.
pretty clear to me what the goals are and how we're spending
Yep.
it. And I don't want to make it less pretty. So if it takes longer, I'm okay with that. That's my opinion.
Well, I appreciate your point, Dan, but I think your opinion's a little skewed. Like, you've been in the weeds so much in leadership roles on the council. You have a much different way of looking at this and understanding. Like, you could look at one of the pages and say, oh, I get this. I know exactly what that's tied to in the real world action of the town. Whereas I think for newer members of the council, the context provides an ability to look at the numbers and say, okay, this generally makes sense, even if I don't understand line by line and account by account. So I think there's a balance. I'm with you, but I think that different folks look at things different ways. And to understand the goal-setting process, I think would be really interesting, because for me, there's a black box of, like, I know Earl does great work, and I know what they're generally doing, but I'd love to see more as to how he plans his year and what could throw it off, and what areas are potentially hazardous and where we need to make sure we've got resources dedicated, and what's just kind of like, no, we'll be fine.
Yep.
And I really hope, we don't need the award-winning presentation early. We want it later. Mostly for bragging rights, right? But I think hopefully getting the goals and objectives to us I hope it's not a huge lift. I hope that's something that is pretty much fluid and being talked about pretty consistently. It doesn't have to be perfect and polished. But I guess also want to say that every time I've asked Jessica for anything, or we've asked Jessica for anything, she does it. And I really appreciate that so much. And I know that we're trying to get more regular reports to council monthly for sort of that, here's where things are with the budget. And I think just building up that consistent touch point will go quite a long way with exactly what we're talking about, just that literacy.
So, in addition to that, one of the other changes is, I think Jessica and I are working, she has been working to build capacity in department heads for a while. It's interesting to watch Jessica work with department heads. She's a very good teacher. And we have some department heads who have everything down, soup to nuts, and others that have maybe been put into the position without a lot of experience with budgeting, and more about they're very good at the work. And I work on the supervision piece, and Jessica works on the budgeting piece, and we build capacity. And I think part of our goal is to build more capacity among our department heads. So we're making them think a little more through this budget season, and they have a period of time to come to me, like we're working on the capital plan. And there's going to be some movement in that plan because we're really encouraging them to dig down and do more stewardship planning, which I'm not sure we've done a lot of that. And I think I think we've done the planning and not had the money. And I think it's important for us to see truly long-term what the costs are, because as we think about want to add a multi-use path, well, there are costs associated with that. So we are finding our lane where they get to talk to me about the value and the goal and the long-term costs and why it's a priority. And then they get to talk to Jessica about how to make sure they've got the right number on that priority. And what we know is what we're going to get from staff is going to be much bigger than what we can afford. And so then Jessica and I are going to have to play the great Jenga game in the capital plan to bring it to you. So we're asking people to stretch, and we're doing the same thing in the operating budget. There was that aspect I think is really important, so.
As you collect that information from department heads, and you ask them to be more thoughtful, more strategic, dig deeper, the impression I'm getting is, ask for everything, and then we can cut it down to what we can afford. So as part of that, are you also asking them to prioritize, to say, we know you're asking for all of this, but if you can't have it, what are the must-haves? What are the things that you really need? Rather than have that just be a arbitrary administrative decision like, oh, we just need to cut 20%, so we'll pick a few things.
So if I can start, and then I so want you to continue with this, but I feel like a good analogy is kind of like the dialogue you guys just had, where your comment about the budget doc is, I don't need all the narrative and stuff. I want the numbers and the 100 questions we're going to ask you, whereas another counselor is like, I want the narrative because I don't understand that conceptually. I feel like we're at that same point with department heads, right? We've had a long history here in Freeport of long tenured staff, and they were okay with where we were as departments and what we were offering and the municipal service level that came. And then much like council changed and wants different priorities and different vision and growth mindset, we now have the same with newer department heads coming in. So I will offer another viewpoint on what you've seen in the past compared to what you're going to get. Is it's not that prior staff necessarily wasn't doing those plannings and focuses as far as like prioritizing wants and needs. The wants and needs at the time were different, and they were more understandable to them with their long tenure, versus now we're trying to build that growth with new department heads of getting that understanding and finding their own priorities for their departments and where things need to go. So now I'm going to turn it back to you.
Well, and I'll also say that with a shift of management comes a shift in priorities, and I am a big proponent of doing things right the first time, if I can. I am a big proponent in fixing maintenance, doing things. If you have a leaky roof and you let it sit for a long time, by the time you fix it, you're doing a lot more. I would love to get us to preservation paving schedules and not having to rebuild roads, because it's a lot cheaper and it's a lot better for our residents who are using those roads. So that takes a shift. Council might not agree with me, so you might push back a little bit on that. You're not going to like what I'm going to say. I just pulled an Earl Gibson. But I'm going to say it anyway. The Freeport your department heads and finance director have had a perspective of less expensive is the way we need to go. And there are needs that we have not filled because of that. And whether we look at the pieces of the public safety roof by the cupolas, cupola, the things that stick out, that we just had to fix. When we were doing it, I was like, well, what caused this? Evidently, it had been leaking for 23 years, which is why we paid as much as we paid and had to pretty much gut the, take it down more. I don't like that, and I don't think it's great stewardship. Now, do I blame the people before? No. I mean, people work with what they have. I don't need to be extravagant, but I think we have to be really good stewards. I think we have to be accessible. I think that we should be creating plans so that we understand what we currently have and what it's going to cost in the future as we start contemplating growing and doing new things. So that is a place to get to with council and with staff. I have my viewpoint that might end up getting tweaked because ultimately council gets to set the priority. I just feel like it's our job to give you an actual look of what the need is, and then you can give us direction from there about these priorities are great, but I need you to reshuffle this and show me reasonably what it looks like at X point, X price point, X less, whatever the case may be. Take 5 years and stretch it into 10 and show me what that looks like and what the impacts are. And I'm actually kind of looking forward to it because now I think I'm beginning to actually understand and we'll be able to have a good conversation.
Any other thoughts or questions? No? Thank you.
Dan has thoughts, he's just not going to show.
We have many more opportunities, Dan. Yes.
So, Jessica, I think one of the things we wanted to do is just, could you briefly run people through the fund balance, not the assignment, but on the 12th, aren't they going to be asked to, I'm sorry, the 17th, aren't they, is that when we ask them about fund balance assignment, or do we bring that back to this committee?
To have that done on the 3rd, but yes, the 17th is when the fund balance request is going to be coming forth. So what are you looking for me to provide right now? Just a rundown on what the balances are as far as
Even
what
just
makes
a
them up? Or?
basic overview, so you know when you first start and you come to the podium,
Yeah.
and you say this is what you're doing and
Sure.
why?
I
That
can
would
do
be
that.
a good
Okay.
start.
So we actually have 6 fund balance designations. I'll go through them one at a time. So there's non-spendable, and that's things that cannot be spent due to their form. So it's like our inventory, right? There's restricted, and, oh my gosh, you know what? I shut it off because I laughed. and then-
Felt bad. Sorry about that. I'm back. So and I'll repeat, non-spendable, it can be spent due to its form, so that's like your inventory. We have restricted fund balance, which can only be spent by regulations enforced by an external entity, so a state agency, which is currently 0. Committed fund balance, which is use is restricted by the highest legislative authority at the town level, and restriction must be removed by a similar action. So it's a council setting priority. And currently in committed, we have the tax rate stabilization and future benefit payout. We also have a fund balance designation of committed reserves, and that's similar to committed, but it's the amount you set to use for trying to think, so like our unemployment reserve and the some of our CIP reserves, so what you designate to go towards funding a capital plan. And then there's the assigned balance. Oh, I'm so sorry. The assigned balance is what you use for the future capital plan. The committed reserve is your smaller miscellaneous reserves, and I don't have a good example written here. I just put miscellaneous smaller reserves, so I'd have to look into that exactly to get, if you're looking for it. But the big one is your unemployment compensation reserve. And then there's unassigned, which is all other fund balances, the rest of your fund balance in excess of all those designations. And that's what you have flexibility in what that balance is. So we've talked historically, some years it's stayed as unassigned fund balance if we're within our policy, which is 1.5 times your expenses or the budget. But we've also given the recommendation to transfer some into the capital plan, because we all know that that's in dire need of funding with the loss of some of those revenues. So is that what you were looking for, Sophie? Is there anything else you'd like?
So at the end of each audit cycle, we are given the magic number of how much we have in unassigned fund balance.
Yep.
So that the target is 1.5 times monthly expenses, budgeted monthly expenses. And then there is this delta, right? Like, we're either not there yet, in which case council doesn't have to do anything, or we're over that. Last year, I think the difference was like $19,000, and council just agreed with Jessica's recommendation to leave it there. This year, I think that number is going to be closer to 500,000, give or take.
That is correct.
So there we go. And so that is when you decide what you want to do with that. Most generally, the decision has been made to push that into capital reserves, and Jessica would make some recommendations to you for that. Is there anything other than the general memo, which Steve probably doesn't know what we're talking about with the general memo, but that you need for that decision? Because for Jessica, having that done this month would be kind of important.
I know the fire truck will come up,
Yes.
so I think we need to address that in some way or another of putting balance towards that purchase.
Can,
I mean, in a lot of ways, that's just funding our capital improvement plan.
Right.
So, I mean, it's 6 half dozen the other,
Yeah.
which is a good problem to have. It's not like we're saying, let's have an ice cream social, you know?
I think part of what would make that decision easier to make when we get closer to the spring bond issuance, which is where we are going to actually apply for the bond, to understand what the value of that money versus borrowing that money would be.
Yeah.
Does the timing of that work out? In other words, when we look at our capital program versus when we have to go out for the bond, are we going to have enough time to
So the timing,
noodle that decision?
the timing that I'm asking for the movement of these funds.
Right, that's different,
which,
yeah.
You know, spoiler alert, the recommendation is to move those funds into the capital reserves. So obviously, this is coming before that spring bond issue, so it'll be before. If I had to give you something to contemplate or think about with this and whether or not it should be applied to the fire truck versus the capital reserves as a whole, you know, we have such a low debt ratio that it's crazy. You've heard me say before, we were 1 year away from being debt-free, right? So, and that's not always a good thing. I was excited for it, not going to lie, but it's not always a good thing. And for me, if we're talking about, at some point, we are going to have to bond something because the reserves are just not there. The funding of those reserves, you know, unless you agree to build into the budget a much higher value to fund the capital reserve plan, the external revenue sources that were funding it in the past just are not there to that level any longer. So when I think about what we need to bond, for me, a fire truck is a perfect item to bond. I would much rather personally see a bond on a fire truck than I had on roads. You know, the return on that is going to be so much better on a fire truck than it's going to be on a road. Your road is going to deteriorate before you're able to get that bond paid off. So, you know, for me, a bond is an easy out of the park hit, you know.
I don't disagree, I just want to make sure there's enough
Yeah.
time to have that conversation about how much do we take out of capital versus how much do we bond, and I don't,
Yeah.
I'm with you, but we
Yeah.
So-
should discuss.
We're going to have the capital, you will adopt the capital program, which is different than the capital budget, in March, April.
Yeah, the second meeting in April, the capital plan gets adopted.
And the application for the bond issuance, I want to say, is due in March or April.
It's one of those. The timing is close.
Around the same time. The other thing that came up the other night was if we wanted to put any of the unassigned fund balance towards the social services or human services program. So I don't know where the rest of the council stands on that. Yeah.
So, Jessica, would you like to share your thought on that?
Well, I guess what I will start with, and I will review the policy to reaffirm, but my current understanding is that when it comes to the unassigned fund balance, it's one of two. It either remains in the unassigned fund balance or it goes to the capital plan, and that's within your reserve policy. So we have a
Our
reserve.
policy set by the council?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So, you know, you can kind of get there with their comment by leaving it in the unassigned fund balance and building into the budget. But to earmark it for something else, you would have to change the reserve policy by adding a reserve for a different purpose and having a designated funding source for that. And then, you know, but I feel that there are pretty significant designated purposes for municipalities. And then there are other things that are great to consider. And I'm not sure I would consider an outside service to be a necessary municipal service for,
So,
sorry.
no,
I know it's not a popular opinion sometimes, but
so it's nice to know that we have conservative people watching the checkbook. But I would also say that the fund balance is money that we have taxed people. And our hope is that every year we will have money left over in the budget, because a $13 million expense budget and a $6 million revenue projection, if I'm not going to probably hit it perfectly, and I would much prefer to hit it to the good as opposed to the bad. But I really, I think council should do what council wants. I mean, that's my primary belief always. But if I was going to give a recommendation, to put an allocation in the budget as this is what we're going to expend this year on our discretionary support of outside community services, makes it's transparent, it's clear, and council can make a decision at that point how much money it wants to tax people to do that. I think that it would be great if one of the things this committee could take on would be a policy, regardless. Are you going to do it with fund balance, or are you going to just put it in the budget as a a lump sum
One
that.
bucket, yeah.
One bucket. Or do you just decide you want to do the same thing you've always done or something totally different? But I do think that would be something that would be great for a committee to take on.
And I think too, when in hearing what you're talking about as far as the budget process and needing or the desire to have some narrative of what the goals and objectives and accomplishments are of the departments, I feel like it may be a balance to achieve, right? Because Dan, you probably know we've spent a lot of budget review time on $30,000 for outside agencies, right? Like that's the majority of our budget meetings, or historically has been. And maybe a shift this year is to say, okay, well, we'll budget 30,000, but it'll be outside the budget process where we determine where that money is going to go. And the application process and review process can be handled at a committee level outside that budget focus, right? Because if I'm hearing that council wants more time to be able to review the budget, I mean, even in the existing meeting schedule that we had, so much of that time was spent with outside agency focus, that it might be good to eliminate that crunch, right, of time and give you the flexibility you need to be comfortable with the budget that you're being faced with and worry about where those outside funds are going at a later point.
No, my thought is that we're adding to the list of what a finance committee would take on. And what I've heard so far is continue to understand and learn more about assessing. And to do that at a future meeting with Min actually walking you through some comparisons, not to teach you how to be assessors, but rather to better understand how it's done.
I think I wrote down for that, sort of understanding those variables and nuances that go into it. I know, careful what we wish for.
I think the full council has asked, and you echoed today, kind of a review of the investment policy. That's probably something that would be good for a committee to do once a year, just to kind of have their eyes on it. We had talked in the past about capital reserve funding, so we have this woefully under-prepared capital fund balance for the future. We had also talked about wanting to create some guidance or guidelines around how we create fees and what that looks like. And I've added to that support for outside community organizations, kind of what is that going to look like? Is it going to stay the same as it always has? If it's going to change, we probably should have some guidance or policy directive from the council on that. So what else should we put?
Can I add one more item which has come up in the past? I know about reviewing wages and benefits and various different things around that, so don't get scared. But
Wow, this is
talked about
going to be
reviewing
a
that.
wild committee.
It's going to be tons of fun, Joanna.
Can't wait. So speaking of committee, Sophie and I were discussing bringing this to council on the 17th to formally enact it. It doesn't actually exist yet. So should probably do that.
Do you want to include a charge?
Yeah.
Sort of like what the scope of the committee is and is not?
Yeah, that would be great.
Are you going to write it for us?
I wasn't volunteering. But I'm happy to contribute or participate.
So we'll get that on the agenda for next meeting, including the charge. And I also did want to bring attention to the FY25 budget review document that Jessica put together. I don't think we have to go through it now, but I believe this is sort of a preview of what we're anticipating monthly. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question just about establishing the committee? Do you want to enact it, establish it as a permanent committee right up front, or do you want to have it be an ad hoc committee for a year and see if it works out well, and then we can have a better idea what the charge would be and wouldn't be?
I'm inclined to do permanent, but I
only ask because we haven't had one.
I
before,
see
so I
Sophie
don't-
look at Jessica like there's been thoughts on that, so.
Here's my thought. I think it might not be a monthly committee after we tackle a bunch of stuff. It might be that once a year or once a quarter, we meet and review policies or things like that, but there are questions that come up. So sometimes it's good to do things ad hoc to get a sense and be able to shift charges and have an understanding that there absolutely will be
Continuing need.
a charge, like there
Yeah.
will be an evaluation of the charge. So I think also in many organizations of our size, there tends to be a subset of the board or trustees or council that does they might take a deeper dive into the budget. They might look at other trends. It's a way to get some of the finance stuff out of council and more by recommendation.
What is the Special Projects Committee? That's a permanent,
Yep.
yeah, so I feel like meets as needed
Yep.
situation. You keep looking at each other.
Well,
Just for confirmation.
Okay.
yeah. I mean, here's what I know. Here's what I think I know. That we have a history here where our finance director has not done a lot of, outside of the budget time, you don't tend to see a lot of interaction, right? And I want to make sure that what I don't want to end up with is a committee that we keep diving deeper and deeper and deeper into operations. Having said that, I see a lot of things that can be at that appropriate oversight and understanding level of a council, and honestly could help us in the long run get our work together and know that we're kind of on the same page. So, but the reason you see me keep looking at her is because I want to make sure that the two of us are on the same page, and that if she has concerns, she knows she has the right to voice them, and that this is an informal setting.
And I'm happy to let you think about what feels right for staff and operations. I think that's a great point about, I tend to be the kind of person who likes to keep digging, which I welcome boundaries on at any point. So I think if you want to take time to think about that, we can touch base next week before
Sounds
council
great.
and decide.
Sounds great.
My 2 cents on it is that, one, we don't want to get in the way of the work that's being done in the town. At the same time, though, I think there are some items that I think it would be appropriate to have a little bit different interaction with the council and with the public. And I would see, so I'm happy to start with like ad hoc and kind of frame it out and see how it works. But I actually see us getting a lot of stuff done at a committee level like that with interaction with the public and addressing some of the public concerns and giving them a regular forum to bring questions so that they're not just sitting there for their 3 minutes and then they'll be back the next week to try 3 more minutes. Because some of these issues are seemingly complex, but all they need is an explanation and a discussion. And we can head off some sort of negative feelings in the community around what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're doing it. And like, this could be the forum to do that. But I appreciate, in all sincerity, we are not trying to like get in the way of specifically the two of you doing your job. We have the utmost confidence in you both. You're a tremendous asset to the town. And I really appreciate the flexibility of coming here, talking to us, and being in this forum with us. Because I just think it helps bring a different level of understanding to us and to the public, and I think that's only to the betterment of everybody. So thanks for being open to it and taking the time, and I think it's fascinating, but that's just me.
What he said.
Great. Ready?
I think we have clear next steps. Thank you for capturing those so well. I Any other thoughts, questions, or discussion points? All right, I think
So if I work at drafting a charge and sending it out, since there's not a lot of time between the two and I'm taking a vacation, if I send it to all 4, can I just get feedback just to me? No illegal meetings? Okay, awesome.
sounds great. Well, thank you again. Really, really appreciate your time. And I think we're all set. Thank you.
Great.